There are certain people who walk into your life quietly, without fanfare, and yet leave an imprint so deep that no amount of time can erase it. For me, that person was Claire. I met her when I was 21. I met her when I was 21, in the middle of a university lecture hall that smelled faintly of dust and chalk. She wasn't the loudest, nor the most striking at first glance, but there was something in the way she carried herself, subtle confidence wrapped in warmth, that made it impossible not to notice her. We sat 2 rows apart, and I remember the first time she turned around to pass me a set of notes I had missed. Our fingers brushed briefly, and though it was the smallest of gestures, I felt something shift inside me. Her smile was polite, almost careless, but for me, it was as though the air had been knocked out of my lungs. Claire was effortlessly likable. People gravitated to her, not because she demanded attention, but because she made space for others in a way that felt rare. She remembered names, asked questions that mattered, and laughed at things that weren't particularly funny, just to ease the awkwardness of whoever had spoken. She had a quiet kindness, the kind that could make even the loneliest soul feel seen. I, on the other hand, was the opposite. Shy, reserved, more comfortable behind a book or a sketchpad than in the spotlight. I had friends, yes, but none who made the world feel brighter just by existing. Claire did that without trying. The more I saw her, the more I realized I was in trouble. Because what I felt wasn't simple admiration or a fleeting crush. It was something heavier, something that lodged itself into my chest, like a secret I couldn't confess. And the cruelest part of it all was how easily she seemed to belong to everyone, how accessible she was to the people around her, and how I knew, deep down, that I would never be brave enough to tell her what she meant to me. We started talking casually, small conversations between classes. She'd ask about the sketches I was always scribbling in my notebook, and I'd pretend not to care while secretly hanging on every word she said. She once asked if she could keep one of my drawings, a simple sketch of the campus fountain. And though I laughed it off as nothing, I went home that night and stared at the empty page where it used to be, feeling as though I had given her a piece of myself I couldn't take back. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was the beginning of a story that would define so much of who I became, a story of longing, silence, and the kind of love that blooms quietly in the shadows, never finding its voice. Back then, I still believed there would be a moment, somewhere down the line, when fate would hand me the courage I lacked. I told myself that one day I would find the words, that she would look at me differently, that perhaps the universe would conspire to place us in the same orbit, closer than we had ever been. But for now, I stayed where I always did, on the sidelines, watching her shine, carrying the weight of unspoken feelings in the hollow of my chest. And so it began, the love I would never escape, and the silence that would cost me more than I could ever admit. Friendship with Claire came easily. It felt natural, like breathing, though it carried with it a constant undercurrent of longing I could never voice. We began spending more time together outside of classes, study sessions at the library, late-night walks back to the dorms when the campus was quiet and the world felt like it belonged only to us. She would talk about everything: her family, her dreams of becoming a writer, the fears that kept her awake at night. I listened with a kind of reverence, storing away every detail, as though each word she spoke was a treasure I might never find again. In return, she drew me out of my shell in ways no one else ever had. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, and yet, beneath that comfort, there was an ache, because the more I knew her, the deeper I fell. Every smile, every accidental brush of her hand against mine, every moment of laughter that made me forget the rest of the world, each one left me more entangled, more certain that my heart was no longer my own. But then came the signs I tried so hard not to notice. The way her face lit up when she received a text, the way she grew distracted in the middle of our conversations, glancing at her phone with a smile she couldn't hide. Eventually, she told me his name, Daniel, a senior student, charming, confident, everything I was not. She spoke of him with the same softness I had secretly hoped she reserved for me. Her eyes gleamed when she described their conversations, the way he made her laugh, the way he seemed to understand her. I nodded, forced a smile, and asked questions I didn't want the answers to because being near her, even as just a friend, was better than losing her altogether. Still, I couldn't help but notice the change. Our walks grew shorter, our study sessions less frequent. She would cancel plans with me, apologizing quickly before rushing off to meet him. And though I told myself I was fine, that this was what friendship meant, supporting her happiness, I couldn't ignore the sharp sting of being left behind. One night, she showed up at my dorm unexpectedly, her eyes red from crying. Daniel had hurt her. Something trivial, some careless word, but it had broken her heart. She sat on the floor of my room, her head resting against my bed, and poured everything out while I listened in silence, torn between two opposing desires, to comfort her and to tell her that I could love her better if only she'd let me. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed quiet, offering tissues and awkward jokes, trying to mend what someone else had broken. When she finally left that night, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "You're such a good friend. I don't know what I'd do without you." Her words should have warmed me, but instead they cut deeper than any rejection could, because I realized then that I was trapped, caught between my love for her and my fear of losing her altogether. And still, I stayed, because walking away from her would have felt like tearing out my own heart. Claire began dating Daniel officially not long after that night. She told me over coffee, her hands wrapped around the cup as though it were the only warmth in the world. Her voice trembled with excitement, and her eyes shone like stars as she described how he had asked her out. I forced my lips into a smile, even though my chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. I congratulated her, because that's what a good friend was supposed to do. Inside, though, every word tasted like poison. From then on, everything changed. Our meetings became rarer, and when they did happen, she always seemed distracted, checking her phone, mentioning Daniel in every other sentence, laughing about private jokes I wasn't part of. I told myself I was happy for her, that her happiness mattered more than my own. But every day it grew harder to silence the ache inside me. What hurt most wasn't even her absence. It was the glimpses I still caught of the girl I loved when she was with me. The way she'd laugh at something only I could say, the way her eyes softened when I really listened. But those moments were fleeting, swallowed by her growing world with Daniel. I became the shadow at the edge of her light. I was there when she needed help with an essay, or when she wanted someone to vent to after an argument with him. She'd cry into my shoulder, telling me how much she loved him, even when he hurt her, and I'd hold her, nodding, swallowing the bitter truth that my love for her would never be enough. One evening, she invited me to a party Daniel was hosting. I went, though I knew I shouldn't have. I stood in the crowded room, watching her from across the space as she laughed and danced in his arms. She looked radiant, alive in a way she never did with me. My chest burned with jealousy, but more than that, with grief, because seeing her in his embrace made me realize something I had been refusing to accept. She wasn't mine, and she never would be. I left the party early, walking back to my dorm alone. The night was cold, the streets empty, and in that silence, I let myself finally feel everything I had been burying. The love, the longing, the hopelessness. I wanted to hate Daniel, but the truth was, he hadn't stolen her from me. She had chosen him, and that knowledge was unbearable. Yet still I couldn't let go. Every time she called, I answered. Every time she called, I answered. Every time she needed me, I showed up. I became her constant, her safety net, the one who picked up the pieces when Daniel's carelessness left her broken. And every time I told myself this was enough, that at least she still needed me in some way. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was only prolonging my own suffering, because love that isn't returned doesn't fade. It festers. It digs into you, carving out pieces of your soul until you're left hollow. And even then, I clung to it. Because without her, I didn't know who I was anymore. Time has a way of moving faster when you're trying to hold on to something that's already slipping away. Claire graduated a year before me. I still remember the day she walked across the stage in her cap and gown, her smile radiant, her parents beaming with pride, Daniel's arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. I clapped and cheered, but inside it felt like watching the closing scene of a play I had been a part of only as a silent extra. When the applause faded and the ceremony ended, I knew. Whatever role I had in her story was coming to an end. We promised to stay in touch. And at first, we did. She'd call occasionally, updating me on her new job, her new apartment, the way Daniel had surprised her with flowers after a long day. I listened, as I always had, offering encouragement, trying to ignore how her life seemed to be pulling her further and further and further away from me. I thought maybe, just maybe, there would come a day when she'd realize what I had always felt. That day never came. Instead, months later, she invited me to her engagement party. I remember staring at the invitation, my hands trembling as though it were a verdict I had long feared but never wanted confirmed. She had chosen him, not just for now, but forever. I went, of course. I told myself it was the right thing to do, that it was better to be there than to disappear from her life completely. She looked breathtaking that night, glowing with happiness, her hand resting on Daniel's as they showed off the ring. When she hugged me and whispered, "I am so glad you came," I smiled. But inside, I felt something inside me shatter. After that, the distance between us grew unbridgeable. Our calls dwindled, then stopped. She built a life with him while I drifted further into mine. I threw myself into work, into fleeting relationships that never lasted, always comparing, always knowing they weren't her. Years passed. I heard through mutual friends that she had children, that she moved to a bigger house, that she was living the kind of life she had once dreamed of. Every update was like salt on an old wound, painful but also strangely comforting, because at least I still knew something about her. But the truth I never admitted to anyone was this: I never stopped loving her. Not through the years, not through the silence. My love remained frozen in time, unrequited but undying. And now, as I sit here in the quiet of my old age, I wonder if she ever thought of me at all. If, in some small corner of her heart, she ever wondered what might have been if she had chosen differently. Because I know I think of it every single day. Years passed in silence, and for a long time, I thought my story had ended with her. Claire had moved on, built her life, her family, her future. And I had lived in the ruins of what might have been, carrying her memory like a wound I never allowed to heal. But fate, as cruel as it can be, sometimes leaves behind small mercies. It happened on a quiet evening, long after I had stopped expecting anything from life. I was sitting in a park, staring at the world passing me by, when a woman approached, asking if the bench beside me was free. She was a stranger, yet there was something familiar in the way she carried herself, like someone who, too, had been hurt but hadn't let the pain destroy her. Her name was Anna. At first, our conversations were nothing more than passing pleasantries. But slowly, something shifted. She laughed at my jokes, not the way Claire once had, but in her own way. Genuine, unforced. She listened, really listened, when I spoke about my work, my fears, my regrets. And when she told me about her own scars, I felt a strange kinship, as though life had broken us both in different ways, only to place us here, side by side, when we needed it most. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow. With Anna, I wasn't the friend in love or the man left behind. I was simply myself. And though I will never deny that I once loved Claire with everything I had, I began to realize something I began to realize something I never thought possible. Unrequited love doesn't have to be the end. Sometimes it's a lesson, a cruel teacher that prepares you for the love that will finally meet you halfway. One evening, As the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of fire, Anna reached for my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried more weight than any declaration. And for the first time in my life, I let go of the ghost I had been chasing. Claire will always be a part of my story, but she is no longer the ending. Because here, in this unexpected chapter, I have found something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, this time love will stay.